I want to introduce Dr. Christopher Ali, who's a professor at the University of Virginia and author of the Farm Fresh Broadband book that we're giving out today. So if you want his signature, he's here. The way that this next session is going to work is it's a TED Talk style presentation. So he's done some really interesting research at the national level. If you haven't read the book, we encourage you to do so. But he's going to give us highlights from his research about what local communities are doing to get connected. And then he'll be joined on stage by Jennifer Harris from Connected Nation and Charlie Cano from eText Communications for a conversation between the three of them. So let me welcome Dr. Christopher Ali to the stage to get started with the Go Local and Get Connected presentation.
All right, there we go. Good morning, everybody. Well, I was sitting in the front, so I'm actually just realizing how packed this room is, and this is awesome to see. Let's see if I can get that. Oh, there we go. Thank you so much for the invitation and opportunity to speak with you all today on a topic near and dear to my heart, and I suspect near and dear to our collective hearts as well. And what a day it is today, and I'm honored to be part of a program with such fabulously accomplished digital champions. It's also an exciting time because just last week, as we all know, on NOFO Day, the NTIA announced their Notice of Funding opportunity, thus starting a multi-year journey that will commit $42 billion for broadband equity and access and deployment. This is actually my second time in Texas in 6 months, and in both instances, I was struck by the enthusiasm, passion, and commitment to connectivity here. And it is this zeitgeist that I want to talk about today because we all have a stake in connectivity. And the title of my talk is Need Broadband, Go Local. And I want to start off with a little bit of history. So in March 2021, when he announced what was then called the American Jobs Plan, which would become the Infrastructure Act, President Biden said broadband is the next electricity. And of course, Comptroller Hager just told us the exact same thing. Broadband is the next electricity. Now, this is something I think that we've all heard. And I think it's often meant to mean that broadband today is as essential as electricity was yesterday. But to me, there's something much more than that. It is a call to answer the question of history. How do you connect a country? To answer this question, we need to go back to the 1930s and Roosevelt's New Deal. In 1935, he created an emergency agency known as the Rural Electrification Administration, which would be made permanent in 1936. The mission of the REA was to bring electricity to rural communities, and in doing so, bring modernity to the countryside. To accomplish this, the REA turned not to the incumbent power companies, but to local communities themselves. They encouraged and funded the creation of local electric cooperatives. More than this, though, they went out to rural communities as part of what was known as the REA Circus, to teach people about the usefulness of electricity. And we can kind of think about this as a precursor to digital inclusion and digital equity programs today. Because the REA knew then that electricity, just like broadband is today, is useless unless people can afford it and know how to use it. So successful was this program that in 1949, when it was noticed that rural telephone subscribers had dropped off dramatically, the Rural Telephone Act was passed, giving the REA the responsibility over rural telephony. Again, the REA bypassed incumbents and went to local communities and local telephone cooperatives. So the moral of the story here is that when charged to connect this country, the REA went local and did so with tremendous success. So keeping this in mind, I want to argue, and this is a spoiler alert for my book, that local broadband is the best broadband. And I'm going to spend the next few minutes trying to convince you of this. And by saying that local broadband is the best broadband, I mean that it includes local accountability and local service, that it is trusted in the community, it is committed to partnerships, that local broadband can take on numerous different forms and structures, from family-owned companies to co-ops, investor-owned companies, municipalities, and that it is a community-first mindset, something that we all can embrace, from small providers to the largest national companies. The bulk of my remarks today are based on my new book, Farm Fresh Broadband, which a lot of you have in front of you, which is incredibly humbling and actually a little intimidating. The book is an analysis of federal and state policies regarding the subsidization, deployment, and regulation of broadband to rural communities. And I kind of describe the book as a story of success and a story of failure. Failure because it chronicles some of the failures of federal policy to correct the rural infrastructure digital divide. But promise because it champions the numerous communities who have connected themselves in the absence of private market support and policy attention. And to fill the pages of my book, I did a lot of things. I did a lot of policy analysis, I did in-depth interviews with key stakeholders and site visits and observations. But the hallmark of my research was most certainly what I called the rural broadband road trip, where my hound dog, Tuna, and I drove 3,600 miles across the American Midwest, talking to, learning from, and hearing from rural residents, broadband providers, local officials, and state representatives. So I see a lot of my work as kind of policy translation, right? Because I think this was necessary to humanize an otherwise technical and technologically kind of loaded, jargony policy. And I called this whole thing a process of lived policy, a method to understand how public policy decisions are lived on the ground. And believe me, if I ever write a sequel to this book, I'm coming to Texas for more research, because I've just loved hearing these stories. So back in 2012, legal scholar Oliver Sylvain coined the term broadband localism to capture the newly emerging practice of what we would now call municipal broadband. And in my work, I expand the term to capture all of the different dynamics of local broadband and to champion community-focused providers, organizations, and digital champions. And here we see how hundreds of smaller, nimble, and importantly local providers have been doing the job of connecting rural America with what Jonathan Sallet calls high-performance broadband. This has included telephone and electric cooperatives, of course, along with municipal and regional public networks and local privately owned companies. At last count, muninetworks.org listed over 300 municipal networks, over 300 communities served by rural electric cooperatives, 10 communities served by broadband cooperatives, and of course, well over 200 telephone cooperatives doing the same. In fact, the NTCA, the Rural Broadband Association, counts over 850 independent, family-owned, and community-based telecommunications companies in their network. This is broadband localism, my friends. So I want to tell you two stories now. Oh, there we go. Two stories. One about Rock County in southwest Minnesota, and the other of Surrey County in southern Virginia. I took a lot of selfies on my road trip, so they always kind of factor into my presentations. So Rock County is located in the southwest pocket of Minnesota, bordering South Dakota to the west and Iowa to the south. It has a population of around 9,300 and a density of about 20 people per square mile. I had the privilege of spending some time in Rock County during my rural broadband road trip and hearing about its story of connectivity. For years, its incredible county administrator had been looking for what he called a dance partner to deploy and operate a fiber optic network. After being rebuffed by several of the major providers, he turned to Alliance Communications, a telecommunications cooperative in South Dakota. With the help of the Minnesota Broadband Office, itself a leader in state broadband planning, it won a $5 million grant from the office. Alliance put in another $6 million, and to finance the last required million, the county bonded itself against 10 years of its wind turbine tax credit. Over the course of a single calendar year, which of course includes 13 months of winter in Minnesota, Rock County, thanks to its digital champions and commitment, became the most connected county in Minnesota with a fiber pass-through rate of 99.93%, which is just incredible, right? County of 10,000 people, roughly. Now there's Surrey County, Virginia. Surrey County is in the southern part of Virginia, close to the historic areas of Williamsburg and Yorktown. It has a population of roughly 6,500, and like Rock County, about 21 people per square mile. Unlike Rock County, however, it is the least connected county in Virginia. With back in 2020, it had an estimated connectivity of 3.6%. My colleague Nicholas Matthews of the University of Minnesota and I did interviews with residents of Surrey County to better understand life in what we call the broadband desert. And what we found is that life in broadband deserts is dominated by waiting. Waiting for a provider, waiting for a web page to load, or waiting for the end of the day so that data caps will be released and downloading can begin. Here, one family told us that they refer to themselves as a second shift family. Second shift family. Because what they have to do is get up in the middle of the night to start downloading their work, their homework, their movies. Second shift family. In some good news, however, thanks to a series of grants, including $6 million from the FCC and a partnership with Dominion Energy, Prince George Electric Cooperative will be aggressively rolling out its rural band fiber optic network to Surrey County. So fingers crossed, and definitely a county for us to be learning from. Looking at the similarities and differences, the main difference that I saw was policy support, notably from the state. Minnesota has a renowned state broadband office that is focused not only on offering grants, but advice, coordination, and best practices as well. The experiential similarities are also numerous, including, of course, the desire for broadband. People want broadband. That's why we're all in the room. A concern for school children, knowing that they are missing out, the importance of partnerships, and of course, local, state, and federal support. And a quick note on public-private partnerships here. Given the infrastructure bill's colossal investment in broadband, P3s are going to be the future, right? Public-private partnerships. But as CTC Technology and Energy recently noted in a report on the subject, there are some things that communities need to look out for when soliciting a dance partner. This might include looking for the ratio of community investment to private profit, what those public interest commitments are going to be. Are these actually realistic projects? And is there a promise of snake oil? This is yet another reason, in addition to the qualities of broadband localism that I've already mentioned, that communities need to be empowered to make the best decisions and choices for themselves. And there will be a lot of choices to make in the coming years. A well-funded and well-resourced state broadband office can go a long way in helping communities find the best dance partner. The success of Rock County and what will hopefully be success in Surrey County would not have been possible without a cooperative. And both electric and telephone cooperatives have been on the vanguard of high-quality, affordable broadband deployment in rural areas. And one thing I wanted to highlight here from my research and speaking with numerous cooperatives, one commonality that I see in them is that they tend to see broadband as an investment in the community and are therefore willing to take a much longer return on investment than the quarterly returns often demanded by large investor-owned companies. This long-term, community-focused outlook makes all the difference in trying to assess financial commitments. Now, I'm a policy scholar by trade and by training, so my focus is always around policy outcomes and recommendations and decisions. And to this, I have a vision for what I think local-centered broadband policy should look like. So first and foremost, it needs to be proximate. It needs to be provided by a trusted local partner. But it also means having a robust state broadband office that can help with planning, policy, and deployment. So proximate here means having resources close by and ready at hand. It needs to be cooperative. And this doesn't mean that it has to be provided by a cooperative, only that the planning and deployment is done in concert between a provider and the community. It needs to be accessible. One of the things I've often heard from broadband providers is how difficult it is to apply for federal money. And so we need to make sure that as states are going to get a windfall of hundreds of millions, potentially billions of dollars, that states make sure that grant applications can be easily filed, because not every provider has a term of lawyers at their disposal. So we need to make sure that the funding is accessible as much as the network is. We also need to make sure that the funding is equitable. And I think, I'm a rural broadband scholar, I wrote a book on rural broadband, but I do think sometimes that we tend to reduce the entirety of the digital divide to one of rural infrastructure, right? But that is not true, right? We know in so many urban areas in the country that networks are degrading, or that people do not have access, or that people cannot afford access. Right? There's more than one digital divide. In fact, there are multiple digital divides. And I think if we reduce everything to rural, oh goodness, then we're going to miss out, right? So we need to make sure that any money that is flowing through to communities is equitable. We also need to make sure that it's inclusive. Inclusive means that we think beyond the first modality of access and also think about affordability and skill development. A broadband network, as I've said before, is absolutely useless unless people can afford it and have the skills to know how to use it. It needs to be accountable. Companies and entities winning grants must be held accountable both to the government and to their communities of service. Again, this is why I'm so bullish about cooperatives. We have seen this level of accountability with co-ops and with many local providers. And importantly, we have seen, I think, a lot of this local-centered policy already be incorporated in the recent NTIA Notice of Funding Opportunity. So we have an opportunity to examine broadband localism in real time, which as a scholar is very exciting. So there's exciting times ahead for broadband, and I, for one, am increasingly optimistic about the future of connectivity. And if there's one thing I can leave you with today and to really hammer home for my local first vision, it is this. At the end of the day, broadband is not about policy, politics, technology, or markets. It's not even about money. Broadband is about people. If we keep this in mind, then meaningful connectivity for all cannot be far away. Thank you very much for your time. Really appreciate it.